we have the two circulation road, while I'm Falcha Caharlacha Commission. So I'd like to introduce the Chair of the Commission for the Future of Ireland, Assembly Member Declan Kearney, to give the context for today's events.
Gormaigad a hamas agus níl a hallú eile le rá agamsa seochar gur thugtú an antroid sin agus fáilte ribh an lochdaíochta atá láthair aniu. Is crinniú sontasach é seo mar a dúirt Thomas agus tasúlagam go mhaithí ahan daine tarfa agus sult as an caintes an díosbaracht a bheits roinne a maithan seo a rith na maidine. Friends, there have been many events organised in this room, in this premises, named honoured Eileen Howell, that I think are very, very consistent with Eileen's memory. But I do think that this particular event that we're staging this morning resonates in particular with the legacy of Eileen in particular. She was a champion and a stalwart for rights in so many different respects. A champion for the rights of the deprived, the marginalised, the working class community here of West Belfast. And she was an absolute champion for the need to reorder and change society within a rights-based framework. Thinking of Eileen in those terms makes me also think of champions such as Inez McCormick, Pat Finucane, Paddy McGrory, other champions of rights over the course of the last 30, 40, 50 years who held the line and were absolutely seminal and instrumental in mainstreaming the rights debate which resonates across this society and which we're going to focus on here today. To begin, the 1916 proclamation is the mission statement for Irish Republicans. I think that can be said as a given. It is a freedom charter that echoes and indeed foreshadowed the content of the South African Freedom Charter, which was published some 40 years later. But a freedom charter for all the people of Ireland, which guarantees religious and civil liberties and made a major statement about the promotion of equal rights and opportunities for all citizens, and that was at the turn of the 20th century. It addressed Irish men and Irish women, and for me, one of the most notable sections of the proclamation is the reference to women at a point in time when, in Irish society and internationally, women did not have the vote and were largely invisible, but not so when it came to the promulgation of revolutionary and radical politics in that era. It's also a declaration of social and economic intent for a rights-based society in which the people are sovereign. And our party, Sinn Féin, is for a citizen-centred, rights-based society. That's the vision that we have of constitutional change. Not constitutional change for its own sake, but constitutional change which is rights-based, a rights-based constitutional settlement in a new Ireland. And equality, fairness and justice must be at the heart of that new Ireland. And these issues of rights and equality are at the heart of our collective efforts to end the divisions and the conflicts of the past and to build for a new future, a new Ireland for all of our people, based on the sovereignty of the people, the Republican ideal. The historic reality in Ireland has been that for centuries, rights have been contested and in many, many instances and in many, many decades, violently denied and repressed. British dominance in Ireland over the centuries has relied upon coercion and repression, the antithesis of citizens' rights. In the 19th century, coercion acts were passed almost annually across the island, and these denied basic civil liberties, the right not to be arrested, for example, without charge, and the right to trial by jury. And then following partition, human rights abuses and inequality became institutionalised in the context of the Orange State. The Special Powers Act, discrimination in employment, housing, the gerrymandering of electoral boundaries were all embedded in the DNA of the Northern State. And after direct rule in 1972, the British government introduced a range of repressive laws, including the Emergency Provisions Act, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and of course, infamously, they introduced media censorship. So rights were being systematically stripped from citizens. For the British state, the law simply became yet another weapon in its arsenal, and all of that was expounded literally by Frank Kitson in his book Low Intensity Operations, where he took the experience of British forces and their imperialist and colonial operations in other parts of the world, notably in Kenya, in Africa, the Middle East, in the earlier stages of the 20th century, and then applied them to the contemporary challenges that the British faced here in this part of Ireland. So consequently, when the Good Friday Agreement came to be negotiated, the issues of equality and human rights were absolutely central to its provisions. And under these provisions that were negotiated and are reflected in the content of the Good Friday Agreement were to be a Bill of Rights for the North, a Civic Forum, an all-island Charter of Rights. And there was a powerful opportunity taken at that time to make the case for the harmonisation of rights across the island. However, instead of looking at best practice around the world and using that to quickly produce a Bill of Rights, unsurprisingly, the British government prevaricated, they waffled, they delayed, they created silos. And regrettably, the Irish government of that period and since did nothing to discourage that approach. 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, there is today no Bill of Rights, no Civic Forum. There is no All-Ireland Civic Forum, and there's no All-Ireland Charter of Rights. And moreover, the so-called Northern Ireland Troubles Act, the Legacy and Reconciliation Act, I prefer to see it as an obscenity for what it is in this version of amnesty legislation which the British have introduced. That has come into effect this week on Wednesday past. And it, in the most egregious way, denies many victims and their families access to the truth, spanning back over 50 years, 5 decades, to the extent now that not only are the children of the victims continuing to campaign for truth and justice, the nature of the Brits' approach to denying truth, justice and decent legislation means now that the grandchildren of those victims are campaigning today for that kind of change, and inquests have been shut down, and in an appalling travesty of any form of due process or justice, what they actually did in the weeks leading up to the 1st of May was they moved at pace to close down inquests in order to ensure that families who were expectant of some form of resolution or justice from inquests were denied even that basic right before the British introduced their so-called amnesty legislation. This week, also a major report entitled Bitter Legacy, State Impunity in the Northern Ireland Conflict, produced by an international expert panel, has found that the British government operated, quote unquote, a systematic practice of impunity to protect its state forces and agents, a reality that all of us know. Sean Brown's abduction and assassination by British agents has now been established to have implicated in excess of 25 state agents in that particular murder. And that goes to the very crux of exactly what it is that report touched on. It also accuses the British state of serious ill-treatment of detainees and of using collusion in the killing of Irish citizens. And last year, a series of reports from Europe also identified very significant human rights concerns. A notable report by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe states, and I quote, "Brexit has already led to a diminution of the rights of Irish and EU citizens in the North, and it threatens to do so to an even greater extent in the future." A European Economic and Social Committee report published last year found that the British Government has failed to live up to its commitment to, and I quote, "continue to facilitate the work of human rights and equality commissions established under the Good Friday Agreement." And it concluded that the British Government has acted incompatibly with this commitment, in particular in the running down of the NI Human Rights Commission to such an extent that the United Nations Accreditation Committee has declined to renew United Nations A status on the grounds that it does not comply with the core provisions of the United Nations rules for national human rights institutions, otherwise known as the Paris Principles. And that's a significant blow to human rights provision and protections, and it is attributed by the report to the British Government's, and I quote again, "actions in stripping the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission of resources to the extent that it cannot discharge its core statutory functions." So I spoke earlier about how the British have played fast and loose with the implementation of provisions that were negotiated into the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. Thereafter, even with the institutions that were delivered in the context of the Good Friday Agreement, the British have systematically hollowed out the ability of those institutions to fulfil the mandate set down for them in relation to the protection of human and democratic rights of citizens here. The third report that I want to touch on is by the International Jurist Delegation, which came to Ireland in February last year, and it represents international human rights lawyers from Europe, from the United States and also from South Africa. Published by the Haldane Society, that wide-ranging report expressed its concerns that the perilous and contingent status of the Human Rights Act, that is the existing Human Rights Act 1998 in Britain's unwritten constitution, is inherently problematic for human rights in the north of Ireland. The report also called on the British Government to end, and I quote, "its legal and political attacks on the Good Friday Agreement." It asserted that the British Government is not acting in good faith or fulfilling its role as an honest broker in maintaining the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, and it called for the implementation of that long-delayed and never-delivered Bill of Rights. The human rights protections that are an integral part of the Good Friday Agreement have been under sustained attack by the Tories for the last 14 years, effectively since they came into power. They've consistently threatened the Human Rights Act itself, stating their intention to scrap it. And that would be a profound and an egregious breach of the Good Friday Agreement itself. Sectarianism and sectarian segregation remain major barriers in the north to building a shared and a better future. Consequently, there is a responsibility on the Irish Government as the co-equal guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement to employ its diplomatic and political resources to end that British strategy. Moreover, the Irish Government must examine the provision of rights in the southern state, which following partition became insular, deeply conservative and economically segregated. Systemic discrimination in the 26 counties has its roots in what you can describe as a contract between the state and its citizens in the form of Bunreacht na hÉireann, but which was heavily influenced and arguably emasculated by religious orthodoxy. Over recent years, society in the North has changed radically, and as a result of some of the more religious elements of that constitution, the ban on divorce, the abortion prohibition, the ban on marriage equality and the blasphemy offence, thankfully all of those have now since been removed. However, the southern states' treatment of women in particular has been absolutely reprehensible. A living legacy continues to cast a long shadow over families on an intergenerational basis across the 26-county state as a direct result of the Magdalene laundries, the mother and baby homes, illegal adoptions, the cervical check scandal, and the historic denial of reproductive autonomy, all of which have impacted upon Irish women in the southern state, both young and old. And those abuses must never be allowed to happen again. But we have to go further. Bunreacht na hÉireann is currently silent on the right to a home, the right to water, the right to a clean environment, the right to medical treatment. And all of that needs to change. So yes, there have been important modernising amendments within Bunreacht na hÉireann, but I believe the best platform upon which to build a rights-based future is through the mechanism of a new constitutional settlement on the island, a new national democracy, addressing those lacunae within the Bunreacht, ensuring that the Bunreacht reflects a rights-based approach to society, and that we do that collectively and move forward together towards an even more modernised democratic state. There's a heavy onus on us all to put in place strategies that promote understanding, as well as a robust internationally compliant human rights system of laws and governance that incorporate rights and freedoms and responsibilities, that guarantee civil and political rights for all citizens, democratic, social and cultural rights, children's rights, language and cultural rights. Environmental and developmental rights must also be enshrined within that constitutional prospectus. The Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, as many of us will attest, have transformed Ireland north and south. But now, 26 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, our challenge must be to complete the work that was begun on the 10th of April 1998. We're fortunate today, this morning, to have a really first-class, fantastic panel of experts on human rights law. And I'm really excited to hear what all of these speakers have to say. I think we can expect a really brilliant conversation and with interventions from them all. I hope that all of yourselves enjoy this conference, that you leave enthused to continue the work of building peace through the protection of human rights. But I also hope, in conclusion, that the conversation that we have today will continue well after this event today, and most important of all, will continue to influence and to impact upon the momentous discussion that we are all having and we are living through at this point in time about the future of constitutional change on the island of Ireland. So, Gura Maigov, and I look forward to our contributions from the panel, chaired by Alva Smith, and I would encourage you all to participate fully in the debate. Gura Maigov.
Smith. I'm a former academic from Dublin and a long-time activist for equality, justice and human rights. I am very, very pleased to be here this morning. Thank you very much for asking me to chair this session, and also, of course, to welcome such a terrific audience. It's marvellous to see this kind of level of interest. And this, as I think most of you will know, is the 13th public meeting hosted by the Commission on the Future of Ireland. And I can't tell you personally what a sense of great hope and positivity, just hope, that every time I see that Commission on the Future of Ireland, that we are in a planning process, a thinking process, to make this country, as Declan has been saying it, to make this island the very best it can be in terms of equality, human rights, justice, all that is good to help everyone flourish equally and live the best lives that we can. So I just very, very briefly introduce Dr. Shannon Brooke Murphy, who has travelled from Canada, from St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, to be with us today. Thank you very much for making that journey, Shannon Brooke. Lovely to have you. And here then on my left, I have Daniel Holder, who's Director of the Committee on the Administration of Justice. You're very welcome, Daniel. And then at the end of the table, Professor Colin Harvey from Queen's University School of Law. And straight away, no more delays, I'm going to start off with an opening question, which I'm going to put to each of the panellists. And I'm going to start with Shannon Brooke. Okay. And the question is, by the way, they have 2 minutes, and I'll have my eye on them just as much as on you. Do we currently live in a rights-based society? What do you think, Shannon Brooke?
Okay. Well, first, Díomh tá Orma bheith an seo. It's great to be back home in Ireland after 5 years, and thank you very much for including me in this rather impressive gathering of human rights defenders. And I'm not just talking about the top table. I see many people that I recognize from long years of hard work in defense of human rights here on the floor, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you as well. Elva, in answer to your question, I think there is a pretense to a rights-based society. Not just here in Ireland, but in many other Western countries as well, that either perpetrated or were shaped by colonial conquest. That foundational premise of using one portion of the population to subjugate another for the profit or for the benefit of the very few continues to play out here and elsewhere, back where I came from, in Canada as well. The result, one result, has been a refusal to take economic, social, and cultural rights seriously. This now, in my view, needs urgent attention. This is not to downplay the crucial importance of equality rights and diversity rights, or civil and political rights, as Declan has itemized, much less the superordinate right to self-determination, without which all rights are illusory. These will continue to be essential, but what we need most right now is to attend to the universal human rights to food, to clean water, to housing, to health care, and to a healthy environment, and overall to an adequate standard of living with fair conditions of employment for all equally. That is what we need to make real the promise that was set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 75 years ago. That declaration is our common heritage that we can all take ownership of. Like many of you in this room, over the past 20 years, I have been involved in sporadic efforts to improve the level of entrenchment of constitutional human rights protections, both north and south. Some of these efforts have succeeded. Some have fallen short of their full potential, and others, including quite recently, have run aground. To the extent that we, and those who came before us, have succeeded in making gains towards a rights-based society, those limited gains are now threatened by the very nature of the society that has developed as a consequence of our failures to entrench economic, social, and cultural rights for all. And what I'm referring to is the hyper-individualization that is leading to growing alienation, the commodification and monetization of everything, the extreme wealth concentration, and the reckless disregard for the rights of nature which has culminated in the Anthropocene era in which we find ourselves. So at whatever time there is a referendum result in favor of constitutional change, this will afford us the opportunity to put human rights at the very center of a new constitutional order. Such opportunities are rare indeed. So in my view, what we need now is not a series of patchwork, piecemeal amendments to the 1937 Constitution. Instead of settling for a minimalist human rights approach, we need to take a maximalist, a comprehensive Bill of Rights approach to remedy the existing deficits in the constitutional human rights protections, north and south. This must include not only the rights that protect and preserve our diversity, but also those rights that have the greatest potential to unify us despite our diversity. It is time, in my view, for economic and social rights demands to finally take center stage. Gurmaguv.
Thank you very much, Shannon. But Daniel, will you carry on there, please?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to make 3 points in this introductory bit. Do we live in a rights-based society? Well, first of all, I suppose one measure of that is to what extent the right to take part in this type of discussion that we're having today is actually being respected. I mean, CHA is an organisation, as people know, we take no position on the constitutional status of the North. But it's very important, we think, we're part of this conversation, just as we've been part of constitutional reform conversations of Northern Ireland within the UK for many, many years. It's all about whoever holds jurisdiction, ensuring there's rights-based frameworks in here. But people have a right to be part of this conversation. That's underpinned by the general human right to freedom of expression. It's also underpinned by the explicit and express right within the Good Friday Agreement that entitles people to campaign for constitutional change. Yet 25, 26 years on, a lot of people involved in this discussion continue to face varying degrees of flack, harassment and intimidation for doing so. And the climate for that is shaped by those in high political office who dismiss discussions like this as somehow provocative. So I think that's the first measure of do we live in a rights-based society, and we've begun to do a bit of work ourselves. We should have a report with Ulster University out next week on minority rights, the rights of linguistic minorities, unionist minority, ethnic minorities, in the context of United Ireland, and women's rights in the United Ireland. Those reports will be out next week. Second measure, second point, and start with a bit more of a positive note, is that we do have rights, and we do have rights here that have been long fought for. And hardly won and hardly fought for, like rights around fair employment, rights against sex discrimination, and of course, on the back of the Good Friday Agreement, what's been transformational was the incorporation of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's probably very apt this week to pay tribute to the relentless battles that families have had to go through in legacy cases, precisely using and harnessing those rights under the ECHR to finally get the legal system to deliver truth and a historical clarification, and that was beginning to work like it had never worked before, and that's why it was obstructed and now completely closed down, and that's the context we live in. We have these rights, but they're incredibly under threat from a British government that's increasingly behaving like an international outlaw. Let's just take this week. I mean, how did it start? It started with the British government interning refugees into camps as part of its Rwanda policy in the run-up to an election. And it then went on with them running down the clock on legacy inquests and finally closing them down and replacing them with a very weak and limited and non-independent commission that UN experts have denounced as being a flagrant breach, quote-unquote, of the UK's international obligations, and as something that will fuel impunity. And there's been a lot of impunity to date, as the international report found, that was launched actually in the other room, the other side of this room earlier in the week found. My third and final point is around, do we have a rights-based structure at Stormont? We do have the ECHR, but beyond that, and the point's already been made, we were supposed to have such a structure under the Good Friday Agreement. The constraints on ministers and legislators were meant to be objective legal standards that would protect everybody's rights. It was called the Bill of Rights, and that's been obstructed by successive UK governments who have made up a prerequisite of all-party consensus which hands the opponents of rights and equality a veto over having something that was a core component of the peace agreement. And it's not just the Bill of Rights, a lot of the other mechanisms that are used that were to be safeguards, maybe go into detail on this later rather than now, have been completely flipped on their head to be subjective vetoes that are actually blocking and derailing progress at Stormont on a lot of rights-based issues, even when there's a clear majority in favour. So, do we live in a rights-based society? Yeah, we have some rights, but they're very much under threat at the current juncture. Sinead.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you. And I'll turn now to Colin, same question.
Gurumaigut, Alva. No. That's me. Let's just think about what we're talking about today. We're essentially talking about improving the lives of everyone on the island of Ireland, about creating a fairer and better society. We're talking about basic issues of justice. And on those measures, the answer is no. We don't. We have an unequal society, we have an unjust society, we have an unfair society, and it's already been mentioned in relation to socio-economic issues here. Yes, there's been progress, and I don't want to undermine the progress that has already been made, and we need to acknowledge that. But let's be honest, so much of the last 15 years has essentially been about trying to hold on to what we already have against a government in London that has been trying to undermine the protections that are here, that has essentially, at key moments, and still walked away from the values that underpin the Good Friday Agreement and our peace process. So essentially, let's be clear, what we've been doing is we've been trying to, in this region, in the north, mitigate what's been happening to try and hold on. And along that journey, as you know, there have been little victories, and I want to acknowledge those. There have been moments where, the Human Rights Act is still there. There has been progress made in a range of areas that are important in human rights terms. But what we're essentially doing is we're doing what we can. And what we're trying to do is essentially build a new society, and the toolbox is half empty. I was going to use a cake analogy. Trying to bake a cake, half the ingredients aren't there. So you're trying to build a better place, a fairer place for everyone, and the toolbox is half empty. Is it likely that that toolbox will be filled up? No, because I think the impediments to what we're talking about are structural. They're hardwired in to the place that we inhabit. We know what the blockages are. We've been talking about the blockages for a long time. So I think we've got to try to do the best with what we have. I'd like to make clear, I'm speaking in a personal capacity as well today. I think we need to build for the future. I'm involved in the conversation about a new Ireland because I'm fundamentally optimistic. I'm positive. I see the opportunities that are there. When we talk about a pathway to change, I'm interested in transformative change, and human rights and equality are central to that. Thank you very much.
We've had three quite different and there are some crossovers, very interesting responses to the question, which I'm now going to put to you, the audience. It might be nice to introduce yourself, just to say your name if you wish.
Hello, my name is Thomas Quigley. I work for Corsian Kimmy. I work for Taras Jack, which is a Republican ex-prisoners group based in North Belfast. And for the past 25, 26 years, since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we've been advocating for equality of rights for political ex-prisoners. To this day, political ex-prisoners can be legally discriminated against. The Fair Employment Treatment Order doesn't offer them any protections in employment rights. The fact that they were in prison is used as the excuse that political ex-prisoners supported violence, so therefore they have no rights under that order. So as far as political ex-prisoners are concerned, no, we don't live in a rights-based society, and we don't have equality of rights. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to take one or two more. If somebody else has a comment, a view on that particular question. Yes, I have somebody there just behind Thomas there. Don't hold the mic too close, because there's a lot of echo in the room and it's kind of hard to hear.
My name's Frank Martin from Middle of Tyrone. I suppose I believe I've been attending New Ireland Forum since 1983. I believe that the will of the people here and the will of the people generally are very happy where Sinn Féin have taken us. They've created a platform. We actually now have got this debate real. But I think it has to move to a completely different level. I'd love to know what the panel's view is. The British have always been masters in trying to obstruct everything, and the people who done years in jail know that they had to change what happened inside, or it would never have changed. And we know going forward that anything the British can do to make sure we don't get progress, they'll do. The Irish government in the past have been no better. We saw this changing in Scotland when SNP got their feet together and got things going, but whenever they lost the sort of guidance and leadership that they had, that's fallen back. I believe the future of Ireland will depend on how well our leadership, especially in Sinn Féin, operate, but we must deliver. We have to deliver in real ways. We have to deliver in regard to policing. We have to deliver, especially in regard to health and social services, the different things. We've now got an opportunity, and I would be hoping that Sinn Féin will lift and rise to that, because that's what will make the difference of whether we have the future of Ireland in our hands or not.
Can I just ask you, when you say we have to deliver, who is the we that you specifically have in mind there?
Sorry.
Well, I'm so sorry, the mics are not. When you say we have to deliver, who are the we that you have in your head there?
Obviously the people that are here, the people, and I would be very much part of Sinn Féin, and I believe that that's the way it needs to go. We need to really deliver, because if you take the A5, which is a major issue in our area, people are wondering, well, what is Sinn Féin's position, going to the police or whatever? We need to have a clear, what's holding it up? What's stopping it? I know what it is, but a lot of people don't, and they're very frustrated.
Okay, thank you. And there's I have two more hands down there, but just before I take the woman at the back there, can the driver of blue Nissan DXZ move their car, which is blocking someone in? Blue Nissan DXZ. If you're here, your car is blocking someone. So we'll go straight to, yes?
How are you doing? Thanks very much for all of the contributions this morning. I have a friend who's a disability rights activist, and I have to first of all make a confession that I've just realised I never passed on the invitation to this, for this to her. But she contacted me some time ago about other discussions on the future of Ireland, and about the fact that during the pandemic a lot of these meetings became hybrid, so that people like herself with complex needs were able to participate, and that when it came back out of the pandemic again, a lot of them stopped being hybrid, and people who had access to that discussion then lost that access. So it's simply to think about, as we go forward to plan the future Ireland, and an Ireland that can be the best it can, that we ensure in some way that that access is there for for a very important body of people within our society.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I'm sorry I didn't actually see you properly, but raise your hand there. So really questions of accessing rights, in effect. And there was someone now sitting in front of you there, Eileen Weir there. Eileen.
Thank you. And yes, listening to all the speakers this morning, and about just a comment that was made there about we have to deliver. I can guarantee you every community worker in the north of Ireland is delivering. But unfortunately, we haven't got our rights within the community at grassroots level. These conversations are happening at grassroots level, but there's no recognition for it. And not only is there no recognition for it, a lot of the people that I work with and a lot of the other community work with, that it should be a human right to have food on the table for yourself and your children. And unless we address the social and economic issues of this country, we're not going to go very farther in a new Ireland or a new constitution or a new anything. We have Bill of Rights sitting on the shelf from the very beginning, 2002, I think, the first copy, and it was turned down. And this Bill of Rights is sitting on the shelf to represent the people here in Northern Ireland. And the only thing that grassroots, and in particular women, are saying, poor are getting poorer and the richer are getting richer, and that's what you need to address.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Yes, well said. I'm going to go back to the panel now to see we've had a number of different issues raised there, and maybe starting from backwards on. I might start with yourself, Shannon Brooke, there on questions that have been raised about accessing rights, about the importance of social, economic and cultural rights, and maybe putting that for all of you in the context of the Bill of Rights, which has been mentioned from the get-go here.
Alva, I'd like to pass my speaking opportunity to, there's a person here in pink who's had her hand up several times. If I could do that first.
Of course
if you don't mind.
I didn't see you. My apologies to you.
My name's Emma Jane Faulkner. I work for a human rights and criminal law firm in Belfast. So I really just wanted to reiterate really what Colin was saying about the structural blockages that we get every day. I'm in the courts, I work with police officers, I work with prisoners, trying to access rights, be it a lack of housing when prisoners are being released, lack of rights for families trying to get into prison, lack of prisoners being able to access their legal team throughout cases. And every single term, I think people don't realise how much the state try and undermine an individual's rights, because sometimes they see those people as undesirable or unworthy, and it's something that in Rights in New Ireland you really need to, it's a grassroots destructuring really of what the current, and disassembling of what the rights currently look like, and you've got to build it up from the bottom, with every individual in this island deserves equal access to housing, to access to legal teams when they need it, access to education, access to healthcare, and it's fighting those sort of little injustices that happen on a daily basis that then cause massive human rights problems from a state level.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. You haven't spotted any other. I'll go back to you, Shannon Brooke, now, if that's okay with you.
Sure, yes, of course. Thank you. The level of consensus that was able to be built largely through the really excellent work of the Human Rights Consortium, and I'm sure there are people who did that work that are right here in this audience and possibly even on this panel, around the common interest, building on the common interest that we all have in having those rights fulfilled, to build up the quality of life, the access to a dignified life that people from all communities deserve. And so I was very much struck by the cross-community support there was for those rights in particular, that they seem to me to be a unifier and have a lot of potential to identify common interest and build a new Ireland, as is said here, that serves everybody. So I'm glad to hear that reflected back from various others in the audience, even those that are working largely within the criminal justice system, that your clients, it's due in part to their lack of access, for many of them, lack of access to those economic and social rights, that they find themselves sometimes in conflict with the law.
Thank you very much. Go on to you, Daniel.
Thank you. I suppose it strikes me how many of the rights-based provisions that were in the peace agreements that haven't been implemented were meant to address some of the issues that have been raised so far, and would have a read-over, obviously, onto a new Ireland context. We start with the issue of prisoners with conflict-related convictions. That was meant to be dealt with by the Bill of Rights. Had it been put in place, it would have outlawed discrimination against anyone with relevant criminal convictions. It could have been part of that sort of transitional justice process of making it unlawful to discriminate against prisoners with conflict-related convictions. It hasn't been put into place. Pick up Eileen's point in terms of socio-economic rights, St Andrew's Agreement 2006, a very clear legal duty on the executive to adopt an anti-poverty strategy based on objective need, also has not been put into place despite it being desperately needed. We won a judicial review in 2015 that it hadn't been implemented, that the whole Northern Ireland executive, in theory, had operated unlawfully, but then 4 out of 5 of the parties on the executive welcomed the judgment against them. The odd one out being, no surprises, the DUP, which might be an indication of how and why that strategy was being blocked. We strongly suspect it was objection actually to the very concept of objective need when approaches in other types of policy making of sectarian parity, which is sectarian discrimination when you have clear inequalities between different groups, as we still do. But we have these peace process provisions like the anti-poverty strategy that actually still haven't been implemented. And I think, just to pick up on the other point, what we clearly need is that anything that's put in place has to be very strongly legally binding and enforceable, because if it isn't, it gets obstructed and blocked and doesn't happen. And even things that are other elements of the discussion, some of the discussions we've had about migrant rights and in the context of United Ireland, like what would happen with the common travel area, that's a very loose arrangement between two states where they've agreed, mostly in secret, and I'm not sure whether many of the agreements are something that would be particularly palatable, on different types of cooperation. But when it suits for example, this week the British government just to renege on part of the agreement, it's just done it, and there's nothing legally that can actually be done about that. There's a whole discussion about what would happen with the common travel area and free movement between these two islands, not just for British and Irish citizens, but for other residents, that has to happen. And I think the other piece of the jigsaw as well is very much, and picking up on your points there, is institutional reform. We've had a degree of institutional reform of the justice system and the policing system here in the north. It's still very much work in progress. There's not been any sort of full process of reform of the justice mechanisms in the south. And indeed the journey on transforming policing is at a very early stage, and there's still quite a high level of resistance to any form of accountability. And that's something that needs to be factored into all of these discussions.
Thank you, Daniel. Colin?
I'm rather nervous about this, Mike, at this point, but thank you all for the questions. Just try to reflect on what's being said. I think we need to think about the now, where we are now and where we're going next. So on the now question, in terms of what's been raised, I just think we have to name it, right, in terms of why we don't have these things. Don't get me started on the Bill of Rights, right? So just a therapy session here. But, you know, why don't we have single equality legislation that addresses some of the points that have been made around existing discrimination? Why don't we have a Bill of Rights in this society? I won't go into the local reasons we don't, but the British government won't give a Bill of Rights, and equality reform gets stuck in our institutional context. It gets blocked by a political party in particular that I'm not going to name here today, but I'll leave you to guess. And we need to name that. we've done polling at Queen's along with the Human Rights Consortium. The vast majority of people here want change. They want the things we're talking about today. They don't want to see them blocked. So we have to name where the impediments are to change and why they're not happening. We keep working on that. But look, my view is I'm on the management board of an organisation you might have heard of, having an event in the 3 Arena on the 15th of June, or no, not 3 Arena, the SSE Arena. Jerry's here in Carlisle, which you're all welcome to, Pathway to Change. We've just produced an excellent document that's well worth reading from beginning to end. And you'll see in that document, threaded through that document, is a commitment to equality and rights. And one of the things that's really struck me in the last few years, and one of the things we're trying to grapple with really, like I know everyone in this room is perception. What is that perception? Perception determines how you're treated in this society still. In other words, the work that we're doing in Ireland's Future, in terms of building a broad and deep coalition for change, sometimes people don't even do us the courtesy of reading our documents. We're just, oh, that's Ireland's Future, we can put it on there. I think that's a problem. That's an equality issue. And it echoes what Daniel has said about a right to engage in this conversation. This is a Good Friday Agreement discussion. We have a right to be involved in these discussions, way beyond just having a right to be involved in it. But even that seems to be an issue. And I think we have to name that as well and address it. So the next is our document's very, very clear. There's a time frame on that document, and that's what this conversation today is about. Many of us are here today because when we talk about the pathway to change, we mean it. We want to see real change legislated for. When we talk about a new Ireland, we take the new and the new Ireland seriously, and we want to see something new emerge. But let me tell you this. There are people in this island who know this is coming, and they're involved in this discussion. And sometimes I think they're not sitting in public meetings like this having this discussion. They're sitting in private clubs in Dublin, yes, such things exist, working out how they can minimise change when this eventually comes. So really what I've been trying to do with many, many others is trying to encourage civil society to join the discussion. If you want to shape this, you need to be there. Now I understand there are difficulties, challenges, and there's sometimes a chill factor, but really today it's about a call to civic society across the island of Ireland to be part of this conversation about transformative change, to join in to make sure that equality and rights, social justice, climate justice are at the centre. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. We will. Before we finish, I think we will come back to that call for continuing these conversations, for building, for developing that movement and civic sense and commitment. There are a number of other issues that have been raised during the various responses and your questions. So I just want to go back and check with the audience to see if you have comments on what you've heard there that you wish to make. I'm looking over here where it says, there you are, you see the hands start going up. That's great. So I'm going to take the woman at the back there, and they're bringing the mic to you. So don't hold it too close, don't hold it too far away.
Hello, it's wonderful to have such
a... stand up.
My name's Siobhan McCallan. It's wonderful to have such a wealth of experts here on the Falls Road this morning, so it's greatly appreciated that you're here. As a retired school teacher, one of my roles was implementing the Rights, Respect and School Award, and I suppose just listening to the conversation, it takes a lot of work. It's you choose to take on that extra work, but it's implementing an award based on the UNICEF and the articles of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. And I'm thinking, are we missing a trick by not making that like a statutory or compulsory element of the curriculum? Because empowering those children creates like rights-based warriors who are going to go out into society because they understand the rights that they do have, and they'll go out and fight for the justice that people deserve. So that's one point. And the second point I just want to make is, in light of the legislation, the Bill of Shame that came into play this week, how much do you think we can depend on a Labour government who have already said that they would repeal that legislation Can we trust them, and will it help? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good question. And there was someone just beside you there with the green shirt. Yep.
Hi, my name is Orla. I'm part of Sinn Féin. I think for me it's going back to the rights, and I feel the right to even have a discussion around this, and I feel it's still a class-based thing even in the South. It's like it's only certain people that want to discuss United Ireland, and I think it's also to bring the discussion into the wider public forum. It's great having these, and I love these events, but I think it's giving the people the right to actually discuss this and not to feel bad about that. I think that's really crucial. And Alva, I have to say personally, I'm really thrilled you're here. The work you've done on abortion rights and LGBT rights in the South, this just means a lot to me personally. Yeah. And I would just like to ask you as well, would you have any advice for us even around how we can build on what we all feel and actually taking this into a movement that can actually make change that we all really want? Not even about United Ireland, but just how we can harness that real support that's out there. Thank you.
Can I just ask you, do you have ideas about how to do that work of building up on a community basis and making the connections between diverse communities as well? Do you have your own ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we're out walking the streets, out trying to talk to people and engage with people. I think that's really important in the community that we live in. Yes, and I think that some of these discussions, again, have had cross-community contributions. I think it's been really helpful. But I think it's just to try to look at the rights and say to people, do you want equality for your children in school? I think when you sell the rights, then people can go, well, this is one of the ways forward to get those rights, is to have United Ireland, we're all together. Because I think we can all agree, we all want the equality for everybody, and I think it's harnessing that in the framework of United Ireland, I think is the important bit to get across.
But it is that bringing together that's really quite difficult.
Yes, totally, yeah.
So hopefully that will come up, and I think we have some of there. Thank you very much for your contributions there. So here in the front.
So, look, really fascinating discussions already. And I just want to make a few comments on the issue of civic engagement. So, I've been working with communities. Some of the people who have supported that work are here today, and thanks to them, you know who you are. For about the last 4 years, I've been doing cross-community, cross-border work at the Civic Society level. It's really difficult work, it's really tough work. It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of time. Now, to get that kind of level of conversation going, there are a number of barriers that you have to confront. So, Colin, I take your point, but there are things that have to happen to be able to allow that conversation to grow. One of the issues is funding for the grassroots to allow them to do this work, so somebody has to fund it. There are barriers around the language that we're using. For some communities, that language is difficult, and that can be a barrier or can create hesitancy. Now, I could give you a long list of the kind of barriers that you need to remove, and I suppose today, based on that work that I've been doing, I would, urge anyone who's interested in this conversation to not just build everything around a citizens' assembly. I think additional spaces for people to talk about this have to be developed as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually going to go back to the panel now. Obviously there are a number of issues that have come up, but I want to just stay with that for the moment about how you actually bring together the vast numbers of people who do really want change and change from a number of different perspectives. Eileen, do you want to just make a quick point there about that? We'll take that. But I'm staying with this, how do we bring this about? for the moment, and there are other issues I'd like to come back to, apart from civic engagement, around the impediments, the barriers, but also that jostling for space between criminal justice issues and what we might call social and socio-economic and cultural issues, and to have the panel's views on those as well. So just bear that in mind. Eileen, go ahead there now.
Yes, just on the discussion that Colin's saying about these fantastic papers that come out of Queen's, that come out of Jordanstown, come out of all these universities. We need easy read documents, not 161 pages of jargon that people at grassroots level can't interpret it. So, you know, if you are serious about getting civic society involved in this, then civic society need to be able to understand the documents that's being published. I can't even understand them. You know, when we're talking to grassroots women, and in particular, you know, I actually have to go to somebody to translate that document for me and give me bullet points and have discussions on it. You know, we went through this. We went through this with the Windsor framework, and I actually had to get Katie Hayward out to explain it. And I had this room full of women to try, because the grassroots want to know. But when you publish a document that has so many jargon language in it that's not real to the ordinary grassroots, and that's where it starts. And we need to get away from this cross community. I represent women from across all communities, and it's not the orange and green card that we need to be putting here. We need to include everybody in this, and not just the orange and green.
Yes, thanks very much, Alan. We are still on that question of access, who gets to have access, which is in itself an issue of human rights. Who actually gets to access the information, the knowledge, the understanding? So what's your view?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, I would fully agree with Colin. I'm inclined to think beyond the current constraints, right, towards what's coming, the coming referendum and what happens after that, because it's going to happen at some point. The preparation needs to start. And that frees us a little bit as well to thinking about, as somebody in this room once said, you have to be able to imagine the future if you're going to change it. And that is so true. As for best practice models, I mean, the main thing is, yes, there are a few, but the main message, particularly I was looking at the United Nations guidance on constitution building as part of my research, and really their conclusion is there is no one size fits all. So we're not going to be able to find that panacea, that silver bullet that is going to make this process easy and smooth and straightforward. But I think the process towards this, it should build on examples of what's already worked here in the recent past, right? So the very good work of the Human Rights Consortium towards building consensus, you know, whatever about the product and that's been shelved, that process itself had a huge value and was really important. And that was very similar to my experience in the first Constitutional Convention that brought political people together with ordinary citizens, together with experts in a really constructive consensus building process, one of the most important products of which was the marriage equality referendum and the passing of that, which had seemed like a mountain, huge mountain to climb. But beyond that, and talking to the point that was made earlier about the need for plain language version, the urgent need for plain language versions of documents that contain important ideas to ensure that everybody can contribute and understand, that's a key and crucial point. And on that, I think we have an excellent model in the South African constitutional change process, where not only did they had a legal version of the documents, they had popular versions of the documents, they had them in the many, many languages that country confronted at that time, needing to integrate the languages of all the people. So yeah, there are good models out there, but there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all. The best model for the process here in Ireland is going to come up from the experience of the people to date.
Thank you very much, Shannon. But I'll go on to Daniel, and feel free to obviously respond to any of the points that have been raised there. I mean, I am particularly interested in where the chair expressing an interest. I think you're not supposed to do that, but never mind. About that kind of, that relationship between issues to do with fundamentally criminal justice and the more social and cultural economic rights issues, and how we kind of sort that out.
Yeah, I mean, again, the economic and social rights piece was supposed to be part of the Bill of Rights, along with a number of the other provisions that were in there, and it's needed more than ever. I mean, I'm probably not the best person to comment on the issue of how do you sort of mobilise and things like that. And apologies, Eileen, we're one of those organisations, CAJ, that does produce those sort of lengthy, nerdy documents, and a lot of our work will probably be about codifying rights. But it is notable there have been in the North 3 major civil rights type mobilisations in the last decade that have had a degree of success. One of them has been the Anjam Jarag, the Irish language movement, driven by young people with great leadership, using lots of social media tools for mobilisation, getting buy-in in a linguistic community, and that's worked very successfully. Another mobilisation was for same-sex marriage, and another mobilisation was for women's reproductive rights. In fact, on both bits of the island, there's lots of lessons that can be learned from those campaigns in terms of mobilisation. But back to the sort of lengthy, nerdy, codified sort of documents on rights that we'll probably end up dipping into. There's a lot to go on, and I think there's a lot to be done on that front, because not much has been done. Some of the issues around, well, how would you codify the rights of Irish speakers, linguistic minorities? There's not much been done on that. What about migrant rights? How would you codify, how would you ensure the human rights of unionists are retained within that context? And is that done through citizenship? There's 2 provisions that came out of the Good Friday Agreement on that point. One was the right to be British or Irish or both, that the British government completely disrespects. But that is to outlive a unity referendum. That means you have to have some provision for equality that ensures equality of treatment for those who wish only to be British citizens. The Framework Convention for National Minorities, that was part of the Good Friday Agreement, the Irish government signing up to that with a view to protecting a future British minority, a unionist minority. That needs to be sort of teased out. But we are in a pretty awful global climate at the minute. Just to pick up on, I mean, there are some very good examples of processes a few decades ago, and the accessibility of them, of constitutional reform across South America, that can be picked up on. The more recent examples are scary. I mean, the mobilisation of the populist right managed to sink a progressive constitution in Chile that would have torn down Pinochet's constitution, which is understandably appalling. So we are in that kind of context. In terms of the question as to whether we can trust the Labour Party to deliver on its commitments to repeal the Legacy Act, I think a few other people may have expressed views when that question was asked. I suppose the chicken out answer is only the time will tell. But that commitment has been repeated so often, it's certainly something to hold feet to fire to in terms of it being delivered, and being delivered fully, not just in particular elements. And Dublin's feet would need to be held to the fire as well. It's very, very welcome that Dublin have taken the interstate case to the European Court of Human Rights, and it may well be that derails the Legacy Act rather than a change of UK government. But if there is a change, there may be a degree of negotiation around what comes out of that as a settlement in a case, and it's something that we can't take our eyes off at all until until the bill is fully repealed and we go back to a human rights compliant mechanism.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm obviously aware of who isn't of elections happening really all over the place, and there was a question asked about the Labour government. We probably won't have time to go into those more political questions, party political questions right now, but they are very important. Colin.
Okay, thanks Siobhan, Orla, Fidelma, Eileen and James for your questions. I'm going to try and answer some of them. Just to frame it, on the naming point I left out the Irish government earlier question. I think it's important to highlight that the Irish government has also been problematic The failure to plan and prepare properly for this is really, at this point, beyond irresponsible, right? So the Irish government needs to step into this space much more proactively. But in terms of the British government, also the Irish government, there's a constitutional convention many, many years ago, more than a decade ago, that voted for the right for people to vote in presidential elections. Will we have a right to vote in the presidential election? No, because it's not there. Constitutional Convention voted in favour of socio-economic rights in the Irish Constitution. Was that implemented? No, it wasn't. So the Irish government hasn't delivered either, and I'm conscious that we are heading into a really important moment politically as well in the next 18 months. So there needs to be a focus, yes, on London, but I think in terms of this conversation, probably more on Dublin, you know, in terms of what's going to happen. Just in terms of children and the rights of children, starting point for me is that this is about children. I'll put it really, really simply. I could do the boring lecture with PowerPoints about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, right? But you'll all run fleeing from the building if I do that, right? So Scotland has just incorporated the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law. There needs to be further work done here in terms of advancing some of those international instruments. What are we talking about? We're talking about in this discussion today that the children on the island of Ireland, wherever they're born, won't have the scripts for their lives written by their postcode or wherever they're born. We're talking about giving people an opportunity to build a fair society for everyone, and that's what it means to me, ultimately. That's the start and end. If people are written off because where they come from, their background, where they live, perceptions about them, then we'll have failed in this project and other projects as well. So I wanted to make that clear. In terms of the discussion about a number of questions, what's really been remarkable, you know, I'm not trying to sort of declare an interest in this involving Ireland's future. We've put civic participation front and centre, and I want to commend Fidelma and everybody else and Eileen for all the work that's already ongoing to engage people. Front and centre. In our new document, there I've mentioned it again, right? In our new document, we try to use different language because we're listening, Fidelma, we're listening to meetings like today. We're trying to listen. We're learning. We're moving. We're doing this. And resources, you're absolutely right. Like many of us are trying to do this in our spare time, and we're trying to, but we're listening, we're learning, we're trying to find language that people are comfortable with. And that's sometimes difficult for people who are committed to this project as well, to try and make the room feel like a welcoming room that everyone can be part of. So civic initiatives have been central. The people have been central to this discussion, and the people will be central to the outcome of the discussion, because it'll be the people who'll decide, north and south, in terms of all of this. In terms of academic work, Jane Souter, who's involved in the Orange Project, which is producing excellent, I have to say, rather footnote-laden papers that are accessible at times too, has produced excellent work on deliberation and different ways of doing this, because central to what happens next is how we design the mechanisms for inclusion, and a lot of thoughts going into how we do that in a way that will deliver the maximum potential for change as to who's in the room and who's not in the room. But I just want to really, in response to the questions, acknowledge the work that's ongoing to reassure, and I know that people are listening very hard to try and get this right. Eileen, Ireland's future, we tried to shrink that down. Look, there's literally creases on Jerry Carlisle's forehead in terms of dealing with me, trying to get the language down to try and make it accessible. But we are very, very conscious. We have much more work to do to make that accessible to everyone. But I just want to end by, Eileen, the work you're doing, the work that so many people in this room is already doing. Like, in some ways, what's remarkable is this is happening anyway. Governments, they'll come in afterwards and they'll claim all the credit. But people in this room they're doing the work. They're doing the work now. But that needs others to step up. And, you know, yes, Labour, I don't have too much trust in many Westminster governments, to be honest. I think the focus needs to be on Dublin, the Irish government. We need much more from the Irish government in this space.
Yeah, we all do, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Colin. I just want to, is my mic working? I'm not sure anymore. Just before we finish, I'm quite horrified to see that the time has raced forward. There are certainly a lot more questions in my own head. But I did want to say, if anybody is absolutely dying to say something and hasn't had the chance, you're very welcome. If you want to come in, just put your hand up there. If there's something you really want to add, or a point that you want to make that hasn't been made, yourself there, yes, and they're going to bring you a mic now, I think. Yep, there we are.
Well, my name is Esther, and I am talking from Grassroots. I don't have university degrees, right? The biggest fear that I'm listening to is the benefits and the things that people in the north are going to lose when they go into a new Ireland. I think they need educated as to what benefits we are going to have when we go into it. Okay?
And I think that's a really important point, that sense of knowing what's facing, knowing what you're moving into. And in a way, it's what a lot of people have been talking about getting that information, understanding and awareness actually moving. But thank you for saying that, because at the bottom line, it is about the everyday. The new Ireland has to be about the valuing of every single person's life equally. Before we finish, I'm going to ask the panel to very, very briefly, I'm sorry that we don't have a lot of time, but just maybe to tell us, and I'm going to start in reverse order this time, starting with Colin. How do you see the future developing from now? But make it specific. What maybe you could even put it in another way. What's the most important thing, in your view, that we need to do now in order for that future to open up and to keep opening up for us? That's a very unlegal kind of question. I hope
that's fine. I'm not a proper lawyer anyway, so I'm an academic. So. But okay, I'll try and answer it. Yeah. We need to face into this directly. We need to stop using euphemisms, and we need to face into what we're talking about today. We're on a pathway to a new Ireland, and we need to encourage everyone on the island, whether in a civil society group, statutory body, public body, to join in that discussion. Too many people are facing away from it, and that include government, but and go beyond government as well. I am resolutely positive, optimistic, hopeful. It's an utter privilege to be here. It's another privilege to be part of this discussion. We can transform this society. We can do something different. What an amazing opportunity for the island. But I want to end, I'm serious about the point about children. Like for me, I think starting in with children on this island and creating opportunity for people and participation. Too many children on this island, their lives are written off from the start. And I'm involved in that discussion because I want to change that. We can create a new Ireland, can be part of transformative change. What a wonderful, wonderful project to be involved in. So please, 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 everyone, north and south, government, civil society, everywhere, face into this, join in, be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, if we were sitting here 10 years ago and asked what's going to happen in the future, I think few people could have predicted a lot of the stuff that has happened, and the lesson of that is change can come quite quickly. I think certainly the trajectory at the moment, and for organisations like ours that take no position and things like that, that's irrelevant in the sense that it looks very much like we're on the trajectory in the near future for the legal test under the Good Friday Agreement for a referendum to be triggered. And once that is triggered, there is going to have to be, well, once it's triggered, well before it's triggered, there needs to be a process of developing what blueprint is actually going to be voted on. And if that's a process that the rights sector very much has to feed into, to ensure there's rights-based content of that, just in the same way the rights sector is fed in under the existing arrangements as to how to try and reform existing structures. At the same time, we all need to be working on because any new island will inherit the rights deficits in the south as well as the north in terms of the lack of accountability, institutional reform, protections, frameworks, all of those sort of things. There's a lot to be doing. Janine.
Right. I think maybe I'll not speak so much to process, since I'm not living here on a full-time basis at the moment. But I just want to talk a little bit about what that future, if we're looking at a future Bill of Rights, a comprehensive Bill of Rights to take full advantage of that constitutional moment that a referendum, a successful referendum, might present us with. We need to look at things that have the potential, and that idea that we need to start communicating that. We need to start talking about it. We need to start listening to what people fear and what people hope for. And focus on those things that have the potential not just to reassure, that's important. I mean, we need to promote constitutional safeguards that will address reported unionists' post-unification fears of things like dispossession or violent retribution, reverse replication of abuses, including political and economic domination, exclusion, discrimination, cultural assimilation, and imposition of religious ethos. So we need to have discussions about measures that will reassure those fears, that will assuage those fears. But we also need to have the kinds of discussions that will excite and invigorate and inspire people. We need to make sure that a future Bill of Rights has intergenerational relevance, that it addresses the past injustices that people have lived through and prevent their recurrences in the future, but also actively respond to emergent human rights needs and demands of new generations coming up. We need a document, we need a set of safeguards and guarantees that are that's going to do all three of those things. I think it's very exciting to look to the future in that potential process. So that's really all I would want to say.
Just to add my own word there, I think, that's all. So it is incredibly exciting. It is really the most exciting thing, I think, in a way that can happen in a life, that you get to be part of a process where you really are rethinking and planning how a society should work and how it can work, and trying to bring that into being. It's also awesome in a way. It fills me personally with a great sense of awe, sometimes fear, but fundamentally hope and excitement, because I think I'm sure absolutely everybody in this room, your work one way and another is always about trying to make this place that we live in better, trying to make people's lives more decent, more dignified, with more possibilities in them, trying to make it equal from children to older people, through people with disabilities, people who come here from elsewhere to live among us, all kinds of people, trying to iron out all of the very hierarchical and always destructive, unequal, unfair differences. And that opportunity, that sense that we have to at least contribute to that process, it is a truly golden opportunity and one that is to be valued. But it is really hard work, and I'm aware of the incredibly hard work that you're all doing here in the North as I trip up on the Enterprise. I'm thinking to myself, but there is a huge amount of work to be done in the South, massive, because there is a kind of slightly laissez-faire kind of attitude. It'll be grand, sure, aren't we in favour of it? Without a realisation of the thinking that we need to do, and the work that we need to do, and the mobilising that we need, and the work that we need to do together. Because unity doesn't happen with two sides. We have to work together. And one of the key questions that I hope will come up in one of the future conversations for this Commission on the Future of Ireland is, how do we actually organise and mobilise together, North and South? How do we build up those relationships on a kind of mass level? So I don't think the Chair is supposed to speak for so long, so I will leave it there, but just to say that it is all the wonderful contributions that you've all made this morning, and the really brilliant and very generous panel that we've had, Colin and Daniel and Shannon, has really been exciting in itself, hugely insightful, has given us all, I would think, a great deal to think about. So thank you all very much. And it does demonstrate that we do want to talk about this, and we need to talk about it, and boy, do we have plenty to say. You'll all get a survey which is from the event organisers, and you've got to give feedback on today's event. And there'll also be a report produced, which I mentioned earlier, and you'll get all of that. And of course, you can share that with friends. And most importantly, please continue the conversations with everybody in your own groups and organisations, and your own friends and family and neighbours, and everybody that you can come across, and encourage people to have similar discussions. So, Gur Míle Maith Go Galéir and Gunari on Boher Lynn. May it all rise before us all. Thank you.
It was a very, very lively discussion that we had this morning, and we crossed a lot of very, very different issues, which ranged really from all kinds of issues to do with human rights, from prisoners' rights, for example, to questions about disabilities or children's rights, thinking about what would really happen in that move towards a unified Ireland. People want to know what their benefits are going to be, what's going to happen. Will they have more, will they have less, will they lose out, will they gain? So we've talked a lot about how do you ensure that people have access to information and understanding and awareness. How can we build that understanding? How can we have civic engagement that really involves everybody in even understanding that this new Ireland that we're building needs to be, must be, and will be built by everybody. That it will not be and should never be just an Ireland of the few, of the rich, of the powerful. And it is we who are organising on the ground who have to move that forward. And I think that came through very strongly today, with so many very practical questions about social rights and economic rights and cultural rights. And I think it was a very productive discussion. The point I'll finish with is a very important one. This is great to see this happening in the north, and we need to do it in the south as well. I'm from Dublin. I know that there is a kind of relaxed attitude about things, but people don't really understand, and they don't really get involved, and we need to work together. We need our campaigning groups, our civil society groups to come together to have these conversations in common about how we build this new Ireland, an Ireland focused on equality and human rights for everyone.